This is MTM Broadcasting, your classic Christian station.
Trials and Triumphs with Pastor Ladina Boo, a program that takes a hard look at the hard topics that affect our children and our families. Gender ideology, diversity, critical race theory, just to name a few. It is time for our churches and our families to be informed and proactive so we can get back to the original foundations our nation was founded on. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on MTM Broadcasting. Trials and Triumphs, a program that takes a hard look at the hard topics with Pastor Ladina Boo.
Good morning. Today is July the 2nd, 2024, and I'm Pastor Ladina Boo from Stockton, Missouri. I thank you for joining me again for Trials and Triumphs. We started last week discussing how this war against our children has been going on in the background for decades, most of it coming from the Democratic Party. They've done horrible experiments on our children and continue to do so. We left off discussing the Milgram experiment and SECUS, which is partially financed by Hugh Hefner, Playboy, and Penthouse. No wonder our schools are in such a disgusting state these days. Let's move on to discuss another initiative the Democrats brought into existence, and that would be the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, GLSEN. GLSEN describes itself as an organization founded in 1990 in the United States that seeks to end discrimination, harassment, and bullying based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression in K-12 schools. Catch the date, 1990. I said it before and I'll say it again, this transgender epidemic in our nation has been orchestrated and coming for our children for decades. GLSEN is headquartered in New York City, but has one office in Washington, D.C. to house the policy department. GLSEN focuses its efforts on the support and opportunities provided by the 4 pillars of safety, respect, health, and leadership. As of 2019, through programs, research, policy training, and resource development, GLSEN has built a network of over 13,000 educators across the country. In addition to national efforts, GLSEN works locally through chapters. As of 2024, there are 36 chapters across the 26 states that train students, educators, and school personnel each year. The chapters also support more than 4,000 registered school-based clubs, commonly known as gay-straight alliances, which work to address anti-LGBT name-calling, bullying, and harassment in their schools. GLSEN also sponsors and participates in a host of annual Days of Action, including GLSEN's Day of Silence every April, GLSEN's Ally Week every September, and GLSEN's No Name Calling Week in January. As of June 2024, GLSEN has the following chapters: Arizona, Arkansas, Austin, Bluegrass, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Central Florida Steering Committee, Central Indiana, Central New Jersey, Central Ohio, Collier County, Connecticut, Greater Cincinnati, Greater Fort Wayne, Gulf Coast, Kansas, Los Angeles, Lower Hudson Valley, Maryland, Massachusetts, Merced, Mid-Hudson, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Northeast Ohio, Northern Utah, Northern Virginia, Northwest Ohio, Oregon, Philly, Richmond, San Diego County, Southeast Michigan, Southern New Jersey, Tampa Bay, Upstate New York, and Washington State. Guided by their research, such as GLSEN's National School Climate Survey, GLSEN has developed resources, lesson plans, and classroom materials and professional development programs for teachers on how to support LGBT students, such as Safe Schools training, Ready, Set, Respect, Safe Space Kits, and program guides for the all the days of action. Safe Schools training and various other professional development opportunities have been facilitated by more than 200 GLSEN trainers to over 5,000 educators and school personnel each year. Ready, Set, Respect is an elementary school toolkit developed to help educators ensure that all students feel safe and respected. And GLSEN's Safe Space Kit, which has been distributed to over 63,000 schools in the country, provides educators with a guide for supporting LGBT students, as well as safe space stickers and posters. Now, we never had safe spaces when I was growing up. It's like, just do what you need to do, and you don't require a safe space. I'm always disturbed by the number of safe spaces on our college campuses. GLSEN has advocated that one of the most effective ways for schools, districts, and states to improve their school climate and make their schools safer and more affirming is to enact LGBTQ inclusive anti-bullying laws and policies. GLSEN has worked with the U.S. Department of Education, Justice, and Health and Human Services to create model policies that support LGBT students and educators, including the first ever trans model policy, as well as implementation guides to ensure that these policies are considered, passed, and implemented. GLSEN has considered their signature legislation to be the Safe Schools Improvement Act and has been honored by the White House as a champion of change. The Safe Schools Improvement Act, in theory, protects every student from bullying and harassment in K-12 learning communities. I dare to say that the Safe School Improvement Act discriminates against straight students, but I will continue with their propaganda and warping of our children's minds. The Safe School Improvement Act requires states that receive federal funds under Title IV of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act ensure that local education agencies adopt evidence-based best practices to prevent and effectively respond to bullying and harassment. The Safe Schools Improvement Act earned bipartisan support from members of Congress since it was first introduced over a decade ago. According to the Act, and I quote, "The bill provides flexibility to state and local education agencies to make schools safer. The Safe School Improvement Act improves school climate and supports positive educational and health outcomes for all students by 1. Prohibiting harassment and bullying in K-12 schools with specific enumeration of students on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and religion. 2. Creating policies at the local level that address the unique needs of communities while ensuring students, parents, and guardians and educators are informed of their school's policy and procedures for handling bullying and harassment. 3. Requiring restorative approaches to school discipline to minimize removal of students from learning communities and prevent student push-out or diversion to the school-to-prison pipeline, which disproportionately impacts LGBTQ+ students, particularly those who are girls, transgender, non-binary, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people with disabilities. And 4, collecting, evaluating, and reporting data on bullying and harassment to increase transparency and identify more effective ways to make schools safe and affirming for all young people who should be able to thrive and reach their full potential. According to GLSEN's 2019 National School Climate Survey, they said 1. The vast majority, 86.3%, of LGBTQ students experience harassment or assault in the past year, and based on personal characteristics such as the sexual orientations, gender identity, or gender expression. 82% of Native American, American Indian or Alaska Native LGBTQ+, or Two-Spirit, middle and high school students experience bullying based on their sexual orientation. 58.6 Black LGBTQ students, middle and high school, experience bullying based on their sexual orientation. 3 and 5, that's 59.5%, Latinx LGBTQ+ middle and high school students experience bullying based on their gender expression. 62.3 of the multiracial LGBTQ+ middle and high school students have been bullied in school based on the way they express their gender. More than one-third, 36.5%, of LGBTQ students reported being victimized at school based on their actual or perceived disability, and 44.9% of LGBT students experienced cyberbullying. Most, 56.6 LGBTQ students who were harassed or assaulted in school, did not report the incident to school staff, most often because they doubted an effective response. Among those who did report, 3 and 5, or 60.5%, said that school staff did nothing or told them to ignore it. 1 in 5, 20.8%, were told to change their behavior, for example, by changing how they dressed, and 7.3% were disciplined after reporting their victimization. One-third of LGBTQ students, 32.7%, missed at least one day of school in the last month because they felt unsafe, and 17.1% changed schools because they felt unsafe. Bullying negatively affects LGBTQ youth's educational outcomes and mental health. Being bullied is associated with lower GPAs, increased absences, decreased likelihood of pursuing post-secondary education, lower self-esteem, and higher levels of depression. LGBTQ youth of color who experience both racist and anti-LGBTQ+ victimization are most likely to skip school due to feeling unsafe and experience the highest level of depression compared to those who experienced one or neither form of victimization. I dispute that this is something to protect all students, especially since it seems to give unfair liberties to LGBTQ youth, persons of color, sexually confused individuals confused about their sexual orientation and gender identity. I would also argue it gives no protection to individuals on the basis of religion. How many times have the pro-Palestinian groups harassing and threatening individuals in our nation of the Jewish faith? How many times have trans rights activists have attacked people in the gay community and straight people, demanding that we fall in line with their agenda? I despise the term cis, but the cis individuals are being harassed, bullied, beaten up, and subjected to all kinds of abuse simply because they adhere to God's design of male and female and do not participate in other lifestyles. I know I've had my fair share of death threats and threats of violence since I started this series to stop the war on children. Most of the individuals I know associated with Gays Against Groomers are harassed and or intimidated on almost a daily basis. There seems to be no protection if you're not a part of this transgender nightmare being inflicted on our children. Pay attention to what is going on around you. As I said last week, stand up and just say no. Our teachers are being physically assaulted in schools and there are no consequences. The patients, i.e. students, seem to be in charge of the asylum. This is out of hand. According to GLSEN, in their frequently asked questions from their website, why does Safe Schools Improvement Act explicitly protect students on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, national origin, sex, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion? Their response, Safe Schools Improvement Act protects every student and explicitly enumerates groups of students who are most vulnerable and therefore more likely to face bullying. Based on findings from GLSEN's National School Climate Survey, LGBTQ plus students who reported having an enumerated policy at their school experienced less anti-LGBTQ victimization than those who reported having a generic policy or no anti-bullying policy. LGBTQ students who reported having an enumerated anti-bullying policy were more likely to report bullying and were also far more likely to say that staff responses were effective than those in schools with only generic policies. My personal belief is that these policies hurt our everyday students, and especially straight and white students. I'm not being prejudicial here. After all, I have persons of color in my family. I have friends who are gay and or transgender or transsexual, and they agree with me, okay? We've got to stop segregating, the ones that understand God's design and just don't fall into the other classifications. Second thing on their website, how will SSIA, that's the program we're talking about right now, I help educators identify new solutions to address bullying in schools. Again, according to GLSEN, SSIA will establish a process to collect, evaluate, and report data on bullying and harassment incidents in every state that receives ESEA Title IV-A funds. This new source of standardized information will better measure incidents of bullying and harassment in every school. It will also help educators determine which programs and services are most effective. 3. What about the process of implementing SSIA? SSIA provides discretion to states and local education agencies on how to implement the law. Policies established under SSIA can and should look different depending on the unique characteristics of communities in every state. Reporting requirements in SSIA are designed to be incorporated into existing data collection efforts that schools already manage under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in order to minimize the burden on staff. 4. Do states and localities already having bullying and harassment prevention laws protect students? That said, in 2021, 21 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico have passed enumerated anti-bullying laws that protect all students. SSIA provides protections for all students regardless of the state where they live. Additionally, SSIA ensures all states are using evidence-based and restorative approaches that minimize exclusionary discipline and interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. Okay, I've never seen the school-to-prison pipeline, actually. You have bad kids and you have good kids, and that's it, but my thoughts are the parents need to parent and teach at the least the 10 Commandments to interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. Teach your children respect and responsibility before they hit the schools in the first place. And contrary to what many people do these days, such as putting a toy in timeout instead of a child, a small spanking on the butt, which God put extra padding on in the first place, will do more to get your child's attention than all your liberal stupidity. It will also get your child's respect. Our schools are alienating students from one another, and especially alienating students from their families. That's their agenda. GLSEN is responsible for the gender and sexuality alliances in our schools today. I quote, "These are LGBTQ student-led clubs and GSAs, Gender and Sexuality Alliances, are leading the work to create safe and LGBTQ inclusive schools, and student organizers are the nation's most powerful base for creating change, along with providing space to organize. GSAs are spaces where students can receive support, socialize, and find community together. GLSEN research indicates that students at schools with a GSA were less likely to feel unsafe because of their sexual orientation or gender expression, and missed less school than their peers who attended schools without GSAs. LGBTQ students with a GSA at their school also reported less anti-LGBTQ discrimination. GLSEN provides free resources to support your GSA's work. Why? Simple question. Why? GLSEN also provides resources for teachers, pages and pages of resources and lesson plans. As a matter of fact, they provide books from their Rainbow Library that sends LGBTQ affirming text sets to schools across the country for free. Any full-time staff member at a K-12 school in a participating state or county is welcome to request a Rainbow Library. All types of K-12 schools are eligible: district schools, magnet, charter, and independent. Each school that applies will be eligible for one Rainbow Library set, and the sets are provided on a first-come, first-served basis. Okay. We've got too many rainbows going on, and none of them happen to be the rainbow that God provided whenever the flood was over. But anyway, founded 25 years ago, GLSEN puts forth that they are the leading national education organization focused on ensuring safe and affirming schools for LGBTQ students. GLSEN has volunteer-run chapters in 31 states. A lot of the books put out there are what most would consider, in their Rainbow Library, would consider as being pornographic and indoctrination materials for our children. GLSEN puts out videos and books about misgendering, gender terminology, and pronouns. If I never heard about pronouns again, I'd be a very happy person. I don't discuss people by pronouns. I use names, and this misgendering epidemic is destroying our ability to even converse with our neighbors. I am personally tired of June being Gay Pride Month, with everything being inundated with gay pride flags, transgender flags, leather fetish flags, etc. I was disturbed enough by Black History Month, but it was small potatoes compared to Gay Pride Month. Why can't we all just be Americans? Not hyphenated Americans, simply Americans. But of course, GLSEN has put forth LGBTQ History Month with resources that include an interactive timeline and coloring books, as well as other classroom resources for a range of students ages K through 12. Former GLSEN chapter leader Rodney Wilson, with the support of GLSEN's founder Kevin Jennings and many others, founded LGBTQ History Month in October of 1994. One of the resources you can use and teach about LGBT history is Making Gay History, which they describe as the critically acclaimed and award-winning podcast that brings LGBTQ history to life through the voices of the people who lived it. Listen to the podcast to hear about the lives and legacies of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who were participants in the New York Stonewall riots in 1969. I'm a great proponent of teaching history, but don't you think our children should learn the history of our nation? How and why it was established the way it is? Shouldn't they learn about history in a straightforward manner with truth and justice instead of separating everyone by color, nationality, sex, or gender ideology? Our students are being taught division on a daily basis, and you can see the result of that by looking at our colleges and all the current protests and hatred, most of which they probably learn in school. I'm a big proponent of dismantling the federal Department of Education and taking things back to the state level. Unfortunately, that's not what the current administration will ever do. Let's go back to the disclosure of the WPATH files, a series of behind-the-scenes recordings that reveal what top gender doctors really think about sex change procedures. The WPATH tapes came to light earlier this year. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, is what our current administration and various health organizations have deemed the leading authority in the field of gender medicine. Its guidance is routinely used by top medical associations in the United States and abroad, while its standards of care inform insurance companies' approach to coverage policies. The problem, however, is that behind closed doors, top WPATH doctors discussed and at times seemed to challenge the organization's own published guidelines for sex change procedures and acknowledge pushing experimental medical interventions that can have devastating and irreversible complications. WPATH published highly influential clinical guidance called The Standards of Care for the Health of Transgender and Gender Diverse People, version 8, the SOC 8, which recommends the use of invasive and medical interventions such as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex change surgeries, calling them safe and effective. You know, your students in school are all aware of WPATH, okay? Of course, these self-same doctors also complain that detransitioners, explain this one to me, posed harm to trans members at a medical conference. Detransitioners are people who have finally and completely accepted the fact that nothing you can do will turn you into the opposite sex. Anyway, the Daily Caller News Foundation filed a series of public records requests to WPATH SOC8 co-authors who are employed at taxpayer-funded institutions, making their emails subject to open record laws. Buried in more than 100 pages of responsive records from the University of Nevada was a series of emails between prominent WPATH members and leaders, including WPATH Global Education Institute co-chair Gail Knudsen. They were sent in 2022. In one email, Knudsen sent a colleague the link to a folder containing nearly 30 hours of recordings from WPATH's GEI Summit in September of 2022 in Montreal, Canada, which included sessions on mental health, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex change surgery. These sessions provided WPATH members with an in-depth education on the clinical application of topics addressed in the SOC8 treatment guidelines. However, the footage reveals WPATH-affiliated doctors advocating for children to undergo risky sex change procedures and even pushing for these treatments for patients struggling with severe mental health issues. Several sessions were dedicated exclusively to treating children and included recommendations for minors to receive puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. Internal training footage from the world's leading transgender medical association revealed several prominent gender doctors acknowledging how little is known about the impact of sex reassignment drugs, complicating the organization's latest treatment guidelines. The footage obtained by the Daily Caller News Foundation through a public records request shows several faculty members of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health Global Education Institute discussing hormonal treatments for gender dysphoria and their resulting side effects. One physician went so far as to characterize the entire field of hormone therapy as off-label, a term that refers to the use of drugs for purposes other than that for which they were approved. Another doctor acknowledged the uncertainty around how hormone treatments affect fertility. Physicians who took part in these closed-door sessions routinely recognized undesirable effects associated with sex change procedures and the unknown dangers of certain sex change drugs. Nevertheless, those same doctors recommended many sex change procedures and drugs, with one doctor even appealing to justice for transgender people as a North Star for treatment. In an educational session entitled Foundations of Hormonal Treatments, Adults and Adolescents, Dr. Marshall Dahl, a Canadian endocrinologist and WPATH member, joked with the audience about how the field of gender medicine relies on unapproved treatments. Basically, not only are, I'm quoting here, basically not only are the medications off-label, the whole field's off-label. But that's all good, Dahl said, eliciting laughter from the audience. Dr. Stanley Goldfarb of Do No Harm, a watchdog organization focused on keeping identity politics out of healthcare and medical schools. And he reviewed Dahl and other doctors' statements from the recorded session. Goldfarb said that while prescribing medications off-label is not inherently unethical or dangerous, the lack of evidence specifically for supposed off-label treatments for gender-affirming care is. What is unethical here is the failure to properly diagnose and evaluate the causes of the psychological disturbances in these children and the rush to treat them with medications whose consequences to the prepubertal child are basically unstudied, but likely risk a number of complications, including sterility and abnormal development, Goldfarb said. Excuse me. During the conference, prominent WPATH-affiliated doctors, Dr. Joshua Safer and Dr. Asa Radix and Dr. Michael Irwig, who had all been members of the revision committee that oversaw the development of the SOC-8, acknowledged several unknowns regarding the impact of cross-sex hormones. Dr. Safer, co-author of the SOC-8 and the Endocrine Society's Guidelines for Transgender Medical Care, gave a presentation entitled Advanced Gender-Affirming Hormone Therapy, which addressed the use of testosterone in sex reassignment. After initiating testosterone, Dr. Safer recommended giving high doses that enabled the patient to quickly reach a high testosterone level to masculinize them. But Dr. Safer also noted that in preparing his presentation, he was unable to locate evidence on the normal ranges of testosterone, saying there was no data for that. They're experimenting on your children. I quote, "We were looking at some of the normal ranges, and the point is there is no data for it. We're looking at a total testosterone with a lot of binding protein influence, and to overthink it, it's just going to torture the patient," Dr. Safer said at the conference. SOC-8 strongly recommends regular testing during the initiation of cross-sex hormones due to the potential harm associated with elevated sex hormone levels, and provides a target range of serum testosterone levels. It also recommends maintaining sex hormones at a level that promotes bone health, which can be compromised by cross-sex hormone intervention. I've talked about this on numerous occasions. An audience member asked Dr. Safer to provide the minimum testosterone dose that maintains bone health, but he had no answer. Quote, "The question is a minimum testosterone dose that you have to have circulating for minimal bone health," said Dr. Safer, and the answer is, great question. In other words, it's still an experiment on your kids. During a panel discussion titled Advanced Cases in Gender-Affirming Hormone Therapy, Dr. Irwig, who worked on the SOC-8 chapter addressing eunuchs, recommended that male patients receiving cross-sex hormones bank sperm if they're interested in having a biological child. Quoting Dr. Irwig, effects on fertility, there's going to be a lot of sessions on this. There's still a lot that we don't know about this topic, said Dr. Irwig. So it is still possible for a lot of trans women to be fertile if they were to come off the regimens, but we can't predict. Now, in actuality, what we tell our patients is, if you're interested in having a biological child, the safest thing to do is just use the sperm bank now. Put that away so that in the future, if you need it, it is there. Dr. Radix, the president-elect of WPATH and co-chair of the Associate Revision Committee, dissuaded the audience from using bicalutamide, a prostate cancer drug sometimes given off-label as part of a cross-sex drug regimen for its feminizing effect on men. When you've had someone die of hepatic necrosis, I guarantee you're not going to be reaching out for that so quickly. Again, said Dr. Radix, quoting, "It's important that we talk to our clients about the lack of evidence before we start throwing medications at them that are potentially incredibly dangerous," Radix said. And maybe I'm the only one here that says that, but I had a person die from this, and I will not be reaching out for it. Bicalutamide, which can cause liver injury and fatal liver failure, is not approved by the Food and Drug Administration for the treatment of gender dysphoria, precocious puberty, or for use in women and children. Dr. Erwig acknowledged the experimental nature of the drugs used in sex reassignment, explaining the need to protect patients from unintended harm. Quoting Dr. Erwig, "There is so much we don't know. Safety and efficiency are the two most important things that we need to evaluate. And then so many of the medications, we just don't know that. And one of our major goals as physicians and healthcare providers is to do no harm. We really don't want to do something just because they heard it on the internet and then, oops, they died. This is a really bad and tragic. This is bad and tragic," unquote. SOC8 guidelines do not recommend routine use of bicalutamide due to a lack of safety data on the transgender population. However, in a question and answer segment, Dahl said that risk of serious harm from bicalutamide seemed to be low, and clinicians needed to be ready to discuss the possibility of patients using the drug. Quoting Dr. Dahl, the risk for liver, which are quoted on this slide, if you actually look at the numbers, I was checking again, abnormal liver enzyme tests are less than 1%. Serious liver trouble is much like 3 less than 1%. So you're in a 1 in 10,000 range perhaps, so probably has a better safety profile, but nobody knows. These people are experimenting, okay? Excuse me. It's something you just have to be ready to discuss because it's out there, Dahl said. What I commit to do is try spironolactone, cheap, effective. Most people are fine. You don't like it? Then we can talk about some other alternatives. None of the 3 doctors I've mentioned here, nor the medical facilities I work for, would respond to requests for comment. WPATH standards say gender-affirming interventions are based on decades of clinical experience and research. Therefore, they are not considered experimental, cosmetic, or for the mere convenience of the patient. They are safe and effective at reducing gender incongruence and gender dysphoria. I don't agree with that. But going on, puberty blockers fall under the banner of gender-affirming treatments. WPATH's guidelines recommend the use of puberty blockers in children, which are used off-label to induce pubertal suppression, claiming they are fully reversible. However, several doctors presented information during the educational presentations that challenged the idea of puberty blockers being fully reversible. Among them was Dr. Scott Leibowitz, a co-lead in the development of the adolescent chapter of WPATH's SOC8 and current member of the WPATH Board of Directors. I think when we say, okay, puberty blockers are just reversible and it's a very non-invasive treatment, I would say it's more invasive than oftentimes the media makes it out to be, or other people, Leibowitz said during the session. Dr. Daniel Metzger, a WPATH certified pediatric endocrinologist who presented on sex reassignment hormone therapy for adolescents, described how the effects of puberty blockers on brain development is unknown. I quote, "Obviously, teenagers, their brains are changing. They're unwiring and they're rewiring. And if we started one kid unwiring and half rewiring, and then we change their puberty the other way and we're unwiring, people have been trying to figure out what this does to kids' brains. They don't know, okay?" When asked about the impact of puberty blockers on fertility, Metzger said it was unknown if girls placed on puberty blockers during the initial stages of puberty would have eggs mature enough for fertility preservation. I quote, "A little bit of what we know is from little girls who get cancer. They try to do whatever they can in a very fast fashion to preserve that girl's fertility for down the road after she's cured from her cancer. I don't think a lot is known about that still. For, say, a 10-year-old assigned female, I don't think we know." Okay? Our sex is not assigned, okay? I get so tired of them saying that. Assigned at birth, okay, is what they're saying. You know, in my opinion, when you are born, the doctor lifts you up, he looks at you and sees what parts you've got, and that's what you are, okay? God made them male and female. However, SOCA recommends initiating pubertal suppression during the early stages of puberty. Quoting Dr. Metzger, "Kids have zero idea about their fertility. Of course, it's not in the mind of a 13-year-old or 15-year-old or even a 17-year-old because, you know, babies are icky and you can just go to a store and adopt one later, right?" Metzger also explained how puberty blockers impede adolescents from developing the calcium stores needed to prevent osteoporosis later in life. "Normal puberty is the time of putting the calcium into your piggy bank," Metzger said. "This is how I explain it to families. You've got a piggy bank for your calcium, and you better get it all in by 25 because at 25 you're going to live off that piggy bank." The puberty blockers slow that calcium accrual back into the bone quite a bit, back to the pre-pubertal level. We do know that even if you look at people now age 22, if you've done all your this and you've gone off and then you go back to the hormones that you want to have, you are not caught up by age 22, which is about the time you need to fill your piggy bank. This is a concern that not everybody is getting their piggy bank completely filled with calcium, Metzger said. Neither Dr. Metzger nor the hospital where he works would respond to requests for comments. I told you before, your children will end up with osteoporosis if you carry through with this transgender nonsense and sex change surgeries. Statements made at the WPATH conference also seem to complicate the organization's own SOC regarding sex change drugs producing positive mental health outcomes among gender dysphoria patients. Dr. Leibowitz, for instance, explained that initiating cross-sex hormones does not always solve the mental health problems of young people, adding that it was important to share this message with parents. I quote, "I always say to my patients, now that we're starting testosterone or estrogen, now you can finally have mental health problems, right?" said Dr. Leibowitz. And it's really important because then parents don't approach the kids saying, "How come you're having mental health problems? We thought that testosterone was going to be the answer." Again, experimenting. Dr. Goldfarb, a physician with Do No Harm, said it was bizarre to assume a child's mental health problems and transgender desire are unrelated. I quote, The idea is particularly bizarre because the justification for gender-affirming care has been to improve the mental health of the child and has attributed the mental health problems to the failure to receive so-called gender-affirming care. However, it is incumbent upon physicians when encountering a child with mental health disturbances and gender dysphoria to treat the mental health problems and then observe the effects on gender dysphoria. This is particularly true as it is clear that the vast majority of children with gender dysphoria, if allowed to enter and complete puberty, will be perfectly happy in their biologically determined sex and gender. Okay? Don't buy into the lie that dead daughter lies son or anything of that nature. SOCA claims that hormone therapy has been found to positively impact the mental health and quality of life of transgender and gender diverse youth and adults who embark on this treatment. But Gail Knutson, the current co-chair of WPATH's Global Education Institute, acknowledged in one session that a WPATH-funded meta-analysis released the year before that was used to inform the SOC was significantly limited. Does gender-affirming hormone therapy decrease anxiety and depression? Asked Knutson. This was a really interesting meta-analysis that they did, actually for the standards of care. And what they found was that when you looked at these different studies, that the strength of significance was low. Because we all know in this audience that, I'm continuing to quote here, because we all know in this audience that, people have a better quality of life, depressive symptoms decrease, anxiety decreases, Knutson said. But what we're trying to do for the research is really develop much more robust research protocols so it's much more measurable. The SOC 8 cites the WPATH meta-analysis called Baker et al. 2021 as evidence that hormone therapy improved mental health, a move that was highlighted in a recently released CAS review, a sweeping report on the state of gender dysphoria care and medical practices, commissioned by the UK's National Health Institute. I talked about the CAS review before, and the CAS review is what has shut down transgender surgeries and hormone therapies and so forth for minors in many countries on the other side of the world. Don't know why we cannot get that understanding and stop it here for our minors, but the SOC states there is strong evidence demonstrating the benefits in quality of life and well-being of gender-affirming treatments, including endocrine and surgical procedures properly indicated and performed as outlined by the standards of care, citing the Baker study, among others. But the Baker study noted its findings were limited by high risk of bias in study designs, small sample sizes, and confounding with other interventions, and that they could not draw any conclusions about death or suicide. Future studies should investigate the psychological benefits of hormone therapy among larger and more diverse groups of transgender people using study designs that more effectively isolate the effects of hormone treatment. Overall, the CAS review revealed the poor quality of evidence supporting sex reassignment in children completely, and Dr. Goldfarb said the absence of conclusive evidence for treatments championed by WPATH was a reason for great caution, especially when treating children. Quoting, since we know that the majority of children, when allowed to enter puberty and complete puberty, will be perfectly happy with their biologically determined sex and gender, and since the vast majority of the practitioners of so-called gender-affirming care claim that its greatest benefit is to make these children happy and satisfied with their lives, the absence of evidence of such benefit makes this treatment totally unjustified. Again, go figure. Dr. Knutson, nor the medical center where Dr. Knutson works, would respond to a request for comment. Dr. Leibowitz openly challenged the need for evidence-based medical care, saying clinicians should not only consider medical evidence when providing interventions to transgender people, but should weigh ethical considerations such as justice for transgender people when prescribing sex reassignment medical treatments to adolescents. I quote, "Regardless of the evidence base, as I said, evidence is one part of this, but also there's an ethical human rights component to treating people. We don't rely on evidence for every single treatment we do in medicine. We have to look at the whole thing: ethics, human rights, and justice for trans people." These are doctors, what the heck. Dr. Goldfarb told the Daily Caller News Foundation that medicine should be based on objective evidence rather than personal experience. Quoting, "We know from literally thousands of studies of various medical problems that an individual practitioner's sense of the effectiveness or benefit of a treatment is often terribly biased and can result in the exact opposite of their claims of benefit. This is why medical science requires objective studies to test the validity of treatments rather than an individual physician's ideological views or anecdotal experience," said Goldfarb. As I said earlier, our current administration is in collusion with this idiocy. A Biden administration official pressured the World Professional Association for Transgender Health to quickly issue its SOC-8 guidelines and remove minimum age recommendations for transgender procedures, despite a glaring lack of scientific justification, according to unsealed court documents. Canadian sex researcher James Cantor wrote in an unsealed expert report that WPATH saw evidence-based medicine as a threat to its policy goals, allowing its SOC-8 to be influenced by political pressure, litigation, and legislative advocacy strategy, and the financial interests of WPATH members. Internal WPATH communications contained in Cantor's report reveal Assistant Secretary for Health Rachel Levine, you've seen Rachel Levine, a man dressed in a woman's uniform representing our government, pushed for the development of SOC-8 in order to advance the Biden administration's political goals, even having a staff member suggest the removal of specific listings of age that could result in devastating legislation for trans care. I have spoken, quoting, "I have spoken to Admiral Levine today, who, as always, is extremely supportive of the SOC-8, but also very eager for its release, so to ensure integration in the U.S. health policies of the Biden government," one of the WPATH member states. So let's crack on with the job. Another message stated Levine's eagerness should be taken as a charge from the United States government to do what is required to complete the project immediately. Why is the Biden administration so intent on doing sex changes on our children? Now, aren't we a laughingstock already with people like Levine walking around in uniforms? But anyway, that's personal opinion. Despite these concessions, internal communications show certain WPATH members responsible for developing the guidelines agreed with concerns that youth were receiving sloppy medical care and worried about the strength of their evidence. Additionally, members recognized privately there is no agreement on the use of puberty blockers. I'm not clear on which agreement regarding the value of puberty blockers is required to be espoused by a WPATH member or mentor, one message states. My understanding is that a global consensus on puberty blockers does not exist. Cantor further claims that WPATH, I always want to call them Warpath, irritate me. Cantor further claims that WPATH did not ask SOC 8 committee members to identify conflicts of interest, even though some members worked as paid expert witnesses in legal cases relating to the transgender procedures. Moreover, one member of the development group later explained during WPATH's annual conference that minimum age recommendations were removed, quote, to protect clinicians from lawsuits should the clinician decide to provide a treatment to someone younger than a specified age minimum, unquote. Again, this reflects both the existence and the harmful impact of the financial conflict of interest with WPATH and its members faced while developing SOC 8, Cantor said. Cantor's report is part of the case Boe versus Marshall, challenging Alabama's sex change procedures, or ban on sex change procedures for minors. WPATH released SOC 8 in September 2022, rolling back prior recommendations that set age limits for various procedures. Of course, the White House, the HHS, and WPATH did not immediately respond for comment. Again, that's all the time we have today. But I'll be back next week at the same time. In the interim, if you would like to donate to this show to offset costs of my research, you may make a donation via Cash App or Venmo to Ladina Boo, LaDenaBough. Have a blessed week, and be sure to make MTM Broadcasting your favorite station on the Live 365 app.
This is MTM Broadcasting. Your